Warren Buffett said, would you rather be sitting on the bench or in the game?
CFO, COO, CEO.
James Keys, CEO of 7-Eleven.
Chairman and CEO Jim Keys.
Oh, no, it's possible. I mean, you can't even imagine the rumor that Blockbuster turned down Netflix deal.
Very free in those moments, or am I seeing this wrong? How do you go from intern to CEO of 7-Eleven? What is the C-suite of learning?
What an advantage that adversity was. It's how we respond to change that matters. So there's a really important lesson there.
Jim, it is great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Thank you, Ryan.
I saw that you dedicated your book to your dad. You said, my father who taught me how to fish. How did your dad teach you how to fish?
You know, it's kind of a fun story. My dad was a fisherman, and he loved to just go to the local lakes and take me along. And, you know, it was great father-son opportunity. And it was really many, many years later that I heard that expression that, you know, rather than give somebody food, teach them to fish, you know. And honestly, I didn't even come up with that as the dedication for my book. It was suggested to me by the publisher after reading the story about how my dad and I used to go fishing, and he was the inspiration. Even though he had never achieved success in his life, he was a hard-working factory guy, but he always aspired for more for me, and didn't know how to teach me how to get there, but taught me the importance of hard work and learning and lifelong learning.
Interesting definition. I'd love to dig into how you would define success when you mentioned your dad didn't achieve it. Why do you say that?
Well, success, depending on the definition, but literally the title of the book I just wrote is Education is Freedom. And while my dad had, in many ways, a great life, he did a lot of really fun and interesting things. He didn't have the freedom that he wanted to have. And it wasn't about money. That was what was interesting. He didn't care at all about how much money he had. But what he wanted was the freedom to travel, to explore the world, to do the things that he wanted to do.
Gotcha. So you would define success as having freedom, power, ownership over what you choose to get to do each day.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, so many of us get caught up in the wealth game.
Okay.
And, you know, we're on the hamster trail and on a hamster wheel, and we're trying to accumulate wealth and build wealth. And sometimes it becomes for the sake of wealth. And, you know, realistically, all wealth does is gives you flexibility, a little bit of flexibility. But some of the wealthiest people in the world still don't have freedom. They don't have that mindset that they want to explore and learn more about the world. And what I've found is learning gives me more freedom than any amount of money that I could possibly have.
Well, when I look at your career, and we're going to dig into it, so I'm jumping ahead and then we'll come back, but I see you as a CFO, a COO, a CEO of these companies that we all heard of, 7-Eleven, Blockbuster, other jobs. You've worked incredibly hard. I work and help leaders who have roles like that. I don't know if I would call them free. I think they're insanely busy, overworked, and travel all the time. So to me, it's like you don't almost feel that success if we're defining it as freedom. You don't, even though you look like a success, you're the CEO of Blockbuster, you're the CEO of 7-Eleven. You're not very free in those moments, or am I seeing this wrong?
Yeah, I think it depends on your perspective.
Okay.
If you see it as work, then you're not free.
Okay.
But
those jobs weren't work?
I've never worked a day in my life.
Really?
No, every day at Blockbuster, as challenging as it was, every day was a new adventure. Huh. I couldn't wait to get up and take on the challenge of that day and to deal with, I mean, imagine dealing with the titans of finance, guys like Carl Icahn, or Sumner Redstone, or the leaders of the entertainment industry. It was a fascinating time in transition of a business. It was challenging as you can imagine because of the collapse of the financial markets. But even that made it a fascinating period. I tell the story that I ran into Warren Buffett at an event, and he was the one who said, Jim, and I was, I'm not always like, oh, wow, this is great. I was getting beat up pretty badly at some point. And even Warren Buffett said, would you rather be sitting on the bench or in the game? And I was like, you're right. This is tough. I'm getting beat up. I'm getting accused of blah, blah, blah.
And this is when Netflix and Blockbuster are doing their thing, right? And you're leading Blockbuster, you're the CEO of Blockbuster at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem wasn't Netflix at all. We had a very healthy, good competition with Netflix. We were both growing subscribers, et cetera. The difference was we had $1 billion of debt.
Yeah.
They had no debt. They were a startup, people throwing money at them on, and on the equity side of the business. We are a public company, $1 billion of debt. Financial markets collapse, can't refinance the debt, finally get it refinanced at double the interest rates. It's kind of like if you had a mortgage that you signed up for 5 years ago, and you had a variable rate note, and you're like, oh, this is great. I'm paying 2.5%, 3%, interest on this thing. I could afford this fancy house. And then all of a sudden, what happened in the last couple of years happened, and the interest rates go crazy. And now that variable rate refinances at 8%, and suddenly your paycheck isn't big enough to afford the house.
Gotcha.
That was what happened to Blockbuster.
Yeah, and so that's at that point in the middle of all that happening is when you had your interaction with Warren Buffett.
Yeah, I was. We had in the early days. I got there in 2007, and by the way, the rumor that Blockbuster turned down Netflix, that happened in the year 2000. That was like 23 years ago. So hindsight's always 2020. Oh, they should have bought them. By 2007, I got there. The company was already having some serious financial challenges. The week I arrived, they had violated a bank covenant. And, still no big deal. I had been through financial restructuring at 7-Eleven. I knew the challenges, but I also knew the opportunity on the other side. So I was readily willing and able to take on that challenge. But the financial market collapse in 2008 made it exponentially more difficult. So even though we bought a streaming company, we were doing all the right things, we tripled net income and by the third quarter of 2008 and doubled EBITDA. We had a great trajectory and arguably a solid potential competitive advantage for streaming versus Netflix because we acquired this company called MovieLink from the studios. All of that, nothing mattered because with $1 billion of debt, when the financial markets collapsed, couldn't refinance it. You can't build out a digital infrastructure and advertise Blockbuster on demand when you're fighting for your life to be able to have enough cash flow to operate the business.
Wow. Okay, we jumped ahead, and I want to go back to some of your upbringing because I think it's an amazing story of grit and work ethic and being a learning leader, quite frankly. Another lesson I read about that you learned from your dad was he would bring home books like these free encyclopedia volumes with groceries. And that was how it kind of developed some curiosity and a love for reading and learning. Can you take us back to those days when he was bringing home those books of encyclopedias and how that ignited something in you?
It did. And, I've got a related story. My literally our set of encyclopedias came from the grocery store. They had a promotion with a full bag of groceries. You could get one volume and then you had to wait. And then 2 weeks later, you'd go and get another bag of groceries and the second volume would come. Literally that's what I had for reference, but it contained the world. You'd flip through those pages and read about, my dad would show me, a section of the encyclopedia on Burma where he was in World War II as a truck driver on the Burma Road, building the Burma Road. And he was able to show me that little piece of history in the encyclopedia. So it really did ignite a passion for learning. And the real link, interestingly, came from an uncle because he was a school teacher and no one in my family was, had gone to college, barely even got through high school, most of my family members. And all of a sudden, I had an uncle up in North Adams, Mass, and he had gone to college and he was a school teacher. He taught drafting. And I remembered as a kid going to his house and he had a library. And I equated the library to his ability to have freedom. And it wasn't about money and a fancy house and running water that we didn't have. It was that he, during the summer, was off and he was able to travel and do the things my dad wished we could have done. But he could do that. So I equated books, freedom, knowledge. I want that. And ironically, I went back. I went back. It's probably only 10, 15 years ago. I hadn't been to his house in North Adams. It's pretty far out, way out Route 90, almost to Albany. And I went to visit him, and I said, Uncle Lenny, I want to see the library. And he was looking around. He said, what are you talking about? It's a little frame house, very, very modest frame house. And it is like kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and living room. That's it. And I said, well, I know you had a library. And he took me to the washroom. And there was one shelf over the washroom, and it was lined with books from his teaching. And that, to me, was a library. And that, to me, was education. And it was kind of the spark that I needed as a kid to equate books, reading, learning, with success and freedom. It's cool, isn't it?
Man, I love it. You fast forward a little bit, as you're growing up, and unfortunately your parents split up, and your dad gets cancer and passes away. And I read about the fact that you had to step up. This probably helped develop a lot of grit, and eventually you got a job. I think you were 15 working at McDonald's. Can you take us back to when you're 15, having to step up in your life, take some ownership, help others, help your mom as you were growing up?
Yeah, and it sounds. I'm almost embarrassed to make it sound like I've faced adversity, because candidly, I see a lot of kids today. I do a lot of work in schools. I see some of the adversity kids face today.
Yeah,
I grew up with no running water. Yeah, parents divorced, mother left, went uptown to the trailer park. That kind of gives you a feel for the way I was living. That she went to the trailer park for the running water in the house. But I look at that now in contrast to what some of the kids are dealing with today, with a parent in jail, drugs, violence, crime. I didn't have to deal with anything like that. I had to deal with poverty, and still, looking back, I only today realize what an advantage that adversity was, because I compared it to my friends who were fortunate enough to grow up in, nobody was rich back then, but they were wealthier families. They had warm houses with running water and baths and all those things. And yet they didn't have that. They didn't have that same level of grit, as you defined it, that I had. And I had this attitude that no one's going to pamper me. No one's going to take care of me. If I don't do it myself, then I'm toast. And there's nobody going to pay for my college tuition, anything. If I don't figure this out and do it through hard work, then I'm on my own, basically. And that was a good thing, not a bad thing. So that's what I tell students today. It's like, you think you got it rough? You know what? It's an advantage over those who have everything handed to them, because you have to work harder, and it makes you more appreciative, and it makes you have a greater commitment to success than someone who's maybe had it too easy.
What advice, though, do you give to parents now? And this is as much for me as anybody, but I know this is a question I get a lot, and friends of mine have asked. When you have the means to completely support and give your children whatever they need and want, and you love seeing the big smiles when you have big Christmases or you go on the big vacation, and it feels good, man. It feels like I'm doing something, I'm providing. It feels good. I mean, this is a tough dynamic. However, at the same time thinking, am I making it too easy on them? They're not going to develop grit from having everything, right? It's right there. So how do you balance this developing grit when you have all the means in the world as a parent to give them whatever they need and want?
Yeah, I wish I could answer as a parent, but I never had any children. So I am certainly not an authority on this subject. However, from the other perspective, from a kid's perspective, I can tell you, it didn't matter how much money my dad had or how much he tried to give me for things. What he was able to give me is experiences. So my advice to parents today is don't shower your children with gifts, shower them with experiences. Give them a taste for what the world has to offer, different cultures, different people, different experiences. And those are the things that they'll cherish more than, a toy or, or things, stuff. And I think that's, if I had any children, I'd probably struggle with that same balance. I'd want to shower them with everything,
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good for you as a parent. Like, I'm doing this, man. Yeah, I'm with you. It's the hardest thing. I feel like this is one of the biggest topics of conversation with my friends all the time because we all feel like we're messing it up.
Yeah,
and it's hard.
It might in fact be doing them a disservice to make it too easy for them.
100%.
But you can't give them enough when it comes to experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no limit to how much you can expand their mind and expand their imagination through experience.
So how about McDonald's, 15 years old, getting promoted quickly, I read. Like, tell me about this.
Yeah, I think I had to fudge my age when I got the job. And McDonald's was relatively new at the time. That's how old I am. But they had built a store in Worcester, Mass. And it was the latest and greatest thing. And they needed people. So I had a cousin that was working there, and he kind of got me in at like 15 and a half years old. And, it was one of those, it was my very first job. I had no idea how to do the work thing. But I had this idea in my head, and it came from school. So I didn't think I was smarter than anybody else. But I knew that the harder I worked, the more I would prepare, the better I would do. So I learned that lesson in school, that I had to work probably harder than my friends who may have been smarter or had, better conditions to study and all that kind of stuff. But if I worked harder than them, I'd succeed. I took that same mindset to McDonald's. And when they asked me to clean a lot, I was the idiot who would run around the lot. And people are, my peers were looking at me like, you dummy, what are you doing? Just chill out. Just pick up the lot like the rest of us. No, I would run. And they wanted us to like clean half mile up or a mile up and a mile back. And I would run and pick up litter to be able to differentiate myself. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time.
Right.
I just knew that hard work would translate into success or rewards. And sure enough, at like 16, they gave me a shift and they made me a shift manager, which was pretty amazing given the fact that I knew nothing about anything at the time. But I worked hard and I was rewarded for it.
It's funny how that works. As you progress, I believe your baseball skills helped you earn a bit of a scholarship to go to college.
A little bit, yeah, not much because I wasn't.
Holy Cross, right?
Yeah.
But just going to college had to be a pretty big deal. Or was that always a plan, even from you were young? Did your dad say, "Hey, you're not going to be like me. You're going to go to college"? Like, what was the talk track?
No, my dad. I don't remember my dad ever saying the word college because I think it was so far beyond his frame of reference at the time.
Yeah.
And there's a really important lesson here because I'm hearing two narratives that scare me on the street today. One is that college isn't important anymore. And the second is that it's too expensive, that nobody can afford it today. And, I take myself back to those days. And McDonald's offered me a job at an opportunity to go to Hamburger U. Now, I was making like $1.50, $1.75 an hour. And they said, we'll send you to Hamburger U and we'll pay like $4 an hour, which was crazy money at the time. They said, don't go to college, you don't need it. Now, if you dial forward, maybe I would have been CEO of McDonald's instead of 7-Eleven. or maybe I would have washed out somewhere along the way. And what would my resume look like today? I would have had McDonald's, and then I don't know where I would have gone from there with Hamburger U as my only real sort of semi-college experience. So there's a really important lesson there that near term, especially in 3.5% unemployment, these near-term opportunities look like, wow, I can make more money here and I won't have all that debt. But if you dial forward, will that job, will that level of earning be as relevant 20 years from now? It could be a trap, as I almost fell into. And then the second thing that was really important is this issue of, is college too expensive? Remember, $1.75 an hour? Well, if you dial up the cost of college, it was $7,500 a year back then. In today's dollars, it's $50,000 a year. So it was just as intimidating for me and impossible for me making $1.50, $1.75 an hour, as kids today that are making 10 or 12 bucks an hour look at it and go, I can't afford $50,000, $60,000 a year. Well, neither could I. So my lesson in that and my learnings, and I try to emphasize this in the book, is don't let those obstacles intimidate you. And that's the advantage that I had with that adversity. I wasn't afraid of anything. It's like, what could happen?
Just the next thing, right?
It's just the next thing. Just take it on. I'll figure it out.
It's like one of the certainties is that it's going to be uncertain, that there's going to be work, there's going to be setbacks, it's going to be hard. That's really, there's not that many certainties of life. I think those are a few of them, though.
Yeah, it's about the only certainty, and that change is going to happen. Just, whatever path you think you're on, you're going to run into changes.
The whole college thing is interesting because it makes me think of I don't know if you've seen Scott Galloway's he did it on this podcast, he's done on others, but he said, Jay-Z got rich following his passion and not having to go to college. Assume you are not Jay-Z. Like, it just, you hear the stories of Mark Zuckerberg drops out of Harvard or somebody else doesn't go. The overwhelming majority of us are not Jay-Z, or none of us are, in fact. So go to college. I mean, just give yourself the chance to get into the room, and then you can figure it out later. And like you said, I was lucky to get a scholarship to play football in college, and that was awesome. I was going to go regardless. My parents fully supported that and pushed me to do that. But it just gives you a chance that opens up so many different doors and opportunities that if you're shutting all of them, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you see a story of a dropout or somebody who didn't go and they're a millionaire. It's like, that's like 1 in a million. Assume that's not going to be you.
No, it's true. You know what I compare it to, Ryan? It's this. Now, this is Coca-Cola, one of the best known brands in the world, right?
Yes.
I could also be sitting here drinking RC, or I could be drinking a generic can of cola, right? Which one am I going to have greater confidence in? Because I know what's in it. I know what it tastes like.
Yeah, you have Coke for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a brand.
Yeah.
Each of us has a brand identity.
Yeah.
And that brand identity can be, I went to Harvard. It could be I went to Penn State. It could be I went to a local community college. It could be I didn't go to college. But if I didn't go to college and my name is Mark Zuckerberg and my brand is now Facebook, I'm still fine, right?
Yeah.
But that chances, as you said, the probability of success without that degree, which is part of your brand identity, is just exponentially more difficult.
Yeah. You're making it so. I know a few of those stories in my life, but the people are extraordinary people. I mean, they've overcame odds. They're brilliantly smart, and they work insanely hard for what they've gotten. And who knows? They say, hey, you don't have to go. I'm like, you didn't have to go, and credit to you for making it work. I think for the majority of us, it'll just make it a little bit. It'll increase your odds. So let's do whatever we can to increase our odds. So while you're at college, though, you get an internship that turns into full-time employment. Can you walk us through what happened next when you're in college, getting an internship, and then that led to more work?
Yeah, it was graduate school, actually. I was at Columbia going to business school. And believe me, that you talk about not knowing your path. It's another reason to go to college, because in college, I had no earthly idea what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I had a professor intercept me because the only thing I knew that was like a profession was maybe I'd be a lawyer. So I was going to go to law school. I had a poli-sci undergrad. And I had a professor intercept me and say, dude, you're going to be a terrible lawyer. I've seen you in class for 2 years. Please get a business degree. I'm like, business? I had no frame of reference at all. So I applied for JD MBA as a compromise. And somehow, by miracle, got into Columbia. But at Columbia, I ended up with an internship. I started backwards. I started at the business school. The law school waitlisted me, and the business school let me in. So I said, I'll start at the B school. Started there, got an internship with Gulf Oil. Talked my way into the internship because I was starving to death and needed a job. They were looking for engineers, and I had no way I was an engineer. Poli-sci undergrad, right? I get into the interview, and the guy's like, how'd you get in here? I don't know. I just applied. He said, but I don't want to waste your time. We're not going to hire a guy without an engineering degree. And I was like, but this is why you need someone like me. Somehow I
sold him. You sold him on this.
I sold him on it. I said,
How?
You got an hour, right? Let me use it. And I convinced him that, part of the challenge the oil companies had was that they needed people with different backgrounds because their world was changing, and that I would be good for the company. I would bring a different perspective. I can't believe he bought it. But
I can't believe you were wise enough to know it at that age. I was a complete idiot at that age. I wouldn't know what to say. And I would make it about me. And what did you do? You made it about them, right? Yeah. And I think that's what most people should do in interviews, or when you're saying, I want to work for you, is this is how I will make your company, your life better, as opposed to saying, look at me and how awesome I am, hire me. No, it's not about that. It's about making the company and your boss better, making their life easier, whatever it may be. Yeah. I messed this up for years, Jim. So I'm just impressed you, as in your early 20s, even knew to do that.
I don't know how I knew. It just felt like, first of all, hunger does a lot for you.
Yeah, I bet.
I was dying living in New York City. I could not afford, rent, and I needed a job bad. So, I was just trying to figure out any way I could to convince them that they needed me. And I turned it into, here's why, diversity in a way, even though I wasn't, your traditional diversity candidate for an oil company that hired all engineers, I was very different from that model.
Well, obviously you must have done something right once there, because they said, not only are you going to get this internship, we want you to stick with us full time when you're done with school. How did that go?
Oh, it's a great story. And it's a little embarrassing to tell, because remember my plan, right? I was going to JD MBA. Business Sure. is just I'm just trying to make some money to finish my JD MBA. And I'm going to go back to law school, blah, blah, blah. So I'm there for the summer. I'm walking around. I'm like, man, this is the corporate world. And this is the days of 2 martini lunches, Houston, Texas. People would, literally go to lunch and have a couple of drinks. And it was a very different environment back then. And I'd walk around in the afternoons, and guys were sleeping behind their Wall Street Journal, office after office after office, all these people. Well, right around that time, guys like Boone Pickens and Carl Icahn were running around with the Gordon Gekko greed is good speech, talking to shareholders about big fat companies that were bloated and too much G&A. So at the end of the summer, I get invited to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a stuffy old club called the Duquesne Club. Further time stamping this, the women that were in my little internship had to go in the back door of the Duquesne Club to get in, because women weren't allowed in the front door back then, literally.
Wow.
That's that environment that we were all in. This wasn't anything against golf or the Duquesne Club or anything. It was just the times we were in. Right. Kind of gives you a feel for what things were like. So here we are in that very, very staid old gentleman's primarily club, all oil money, and the CEO and the chairman of the company. We're all sitting around as interns, and the chairman turned to us and said, it was about, I think, 6 or 7 of us in the group, and from Harvard and Columbia and Wharton. So the first time they had this group of MBAs, and they're, well, how was the summer? What did you think of Gulf Oil Corporation? And these kids are going around, they're going, oh, I had a lovely summer. It was very interesting. I learned a lot, and all this like stuff, because they all wanted a job.
Mm-hmm.
They were all engineers, of course. I figured there's no way these guys are going to hire me. I had to talk my way into this internship. They'll never hire a guy with a poli-sci background. So I just told them what I thought. I said, gentlemen, I read a lot about, the corporate raiders like Icahn and Boone Pickens, and they're going after the oil companies. And I think you've got a huge G&A opportunity here, because candidly, I walk up and down the halls and a lot of people don't have anything to do. You could almost hear the air sucked out of the room by the other managers that were there and the other interns. They were just shocked that I would say something like that, but it was true and it was honest. And I thought the chairman of this company needs to hear this, that they do have that opportunity. Literally at the end of lunch, they took me aside and said, we want to take you in full-time job, go back to school, finish the MBA. We'll hire you. We're going to put you in the chief financial officer's office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We want to create a group that can help tackle G&A and these other kinds of things.
Wow. So saying what's true as opposed to the kind of fluffy words that don't mean anything was what separated you from all of the other smart people in the room.
Exactly.
Just say what's true.
Confidence.
And I also think you almost, I don't know, maybe you should explain though, you almost have to be like fearless to the fact that, hey, I'm not getting the job. So let's just say what's true, or let's just be who I am, be authentic to myself.
Yeah.
And if it works, great, but it's probably not going to. So let's just go out firing, as opposed to being kind of like, oh, this is really nice. It's a good setup here. Thanks for inviting me. We're like, okay, good. Next. It feels like that was your secret superpower, even though you didn't think of it that way.
It's exactly right. And it's being fearless. And the advantage I had is both that adversity that I grew up with as a kid that made me feel like, what are they going to do? Shoot me? I mean, they can't hurt me, right? So I'm going to say what I think. But the other thing that helped me be fearless is I didn't need that job. This was such an important lesson to me, because what happens to so many people is they feel like they need the job.
Yep.
So they get into a position and their behavior changes to preserve their status quo, because they need that job. They better not say what they really think or do what they really think they need to do, because they're trying to preserve their.
Didn't you need the job though? It felt like you did need the job.
I needed a job, but I also thought I was going back to school.
Okay.
So I thought, first, they're not going to hire me anyway. I'm not qualified for this role. I'm not one of, what they were looking for. And secondly, I want to go back and finish my JD MBA program.
Gotcha.
So what that was is it ended up being a superpower.
Yeah.
It had a fallback. And then when they actually hired me, I went into Gulf with that same fearless attitude, because if they fired me, I was just going to go back to school. But I'd go back a little wealthier, because I would have had a couple of years of, income under my belt. So that fearlessness really was such a huge superpower, because I was able to do and say and take on challenges in a big corporate environment. We're looking around at many of my peers. They were like, "Oh, I'm not selling that." Right.
I love the example though. It's funny. It reminds me, I'm working with put together this really amazing team of coaches and leaders to help advise an awesome company that's already crushing it. But they asked us to share kind of our core values and the way we'd behave. And one of them that we came up with that we really mean is we are not afraid to be fired. And I said, because if we are, then we might not tell you the truth. We're advising, we're consulting, we're doing leadership development stuff. If we're afraid to get fired, we might not tell you the full truth, and then that's not going to serve you. And I remember the CEO and owner of the business came back to us and says, I love that so much. I love that you guys, and we've since worked together for a while now, so he's seen we're unafraid to get fired, knowing it may happen. And if it does, then we'll move on. But I think if you approach it with this fear of being fired, you won't be fully authentic. You won't tell the truth all the way. And then you're going to hurt. You're not going to help your business more if you're just going to be like, like we've all seen the senior leader, even the mid-level manager who's afraid to be fired.
Right.
And they're not just not as good versus the one who's like, you know what, I'm just going to go. That's the person that I want on my team.
Exactly. Ryan, line up 20 people and you can usually tell the entrepreneur from the corporate people, right?
Yeah.
I defined myself early on in my career. I would walk around saying, I'm a corporate entrepreneur. And that's a big difference. It's almost an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Because the corporations will beat the entrepreneur out of you.
Yep.
They, not intentionally, but the peer pressure for conformity that happens, and the bigger the company, the worse it is.
100%.
Peer pressure for conformity. You know, it's no different than grammar school when who raises their hand in class, right? And all the other kids are like, oh, suck up, you know, brown nose, right? It's the same thing. And that carries over, that behavior carries over to the corporate world where it's kind of like, whoa, no. We have to conform. We have to, we don't want to be the outlier here because this environment doesn't reward outliers.
So let's think we're fast forwarding a little bit. You go from an internship, full-time job, CFO, COO, CEO of 7-Eleven. How in the world you get on that fast track? What, I mean, there's books worth of probably stuff you could say here, but how do you go from intern to full-time job to then eventually CEO of 7-Eleven?
Yeah. So the secret was adversity. Again, one of my favorite expressions is Latin, per aspera ad astra. From adversity to the stars. I think NASA uses that. I got it from some astronaut friends. It's a wonderful expression because people don't realize the power of adversity and being translatable into opportunity. So I've also coined the expression CEO doesn't stand for Chief Executive Officer. It stands for change equals opportunity. And once you recognize that you've got the power of managing that change through your response to it. And that's what a CEO does. That's what separates the winners from the losers. So let me take you back. I'll take you down that journey. Gulf merged with Chevron. And I ended up in an environment where at Gulf, I was being rewarded for identifying, corporate excess and, G&A cuts and those kinds of things. Chevron, I was part of the merger team, and I had my future boss put his arm around my shoulder one day and said, "Son, don't know how you got to this job at this age, but at Chevron, you're going to have to pay your dues." And what that meant is I was going to have to go sit in one of those offices behind the Wall Street Journal and wait my turn. At least that was my perception as a kid. It may be unfair. I'm sure Chevron isn't like that today, but back then it was a terrible signal. And one of the guys I had worked for at Gulf had been hired by the Southland Corporation, 7-Eleven. They had just bought a company called Citgo Petroleum. And he was hired to be CEO of Citgo Petroleum. Well, he grabbed me out of Gulf Oil and said, "Come be my head of strategic planning."
Ooh.
I had worked with him at Gulf. He knew my ability to get in and be fearless, if you will. And that's what he needed to be able to turn it around.
Real quick, I had a mentor tell me you're interviewing for your next job every day. So you were interviewing for that lead strategy role and you didn't even know it. But you were interviewing because you impressed that guy who became the CEO so much that he said, "If I'm going over here, you're coming with me." You interviewed for that job for however many years that you worked with him. And I think that's an amazing approach, even if you didn't think of it that way at the time. But what a great way to approach your work, whatever your job is or whatever you're doing. You are interviewing for your next job every day and you don't even realize, like, who are you impressing? Who are you helping? What are you doing? You never know where people are going to be or where the next opportunity is. So treat today's work by doing excellent work as the interview. That's really what it is, right? He knew what you could do. You didn't need to interview. He already did interview you through the process of working together and saying, Jim's my guy. He has to come with me. It's just a great lesson, I think, for all of us.
You know what I was doing? I was building my brand.
Yeah.
Right. And I still do every day.
Yeah.
I'm building my brand. Writing my book is building my brand.
Yeah.
And if
through
we all
work, though, right? Through work and performance and excellence, like that's how you built your brand. It was like you did the work, man, right? You weren't like out there just like flashy. It's like what needs to be done, doing it, right? And some. I think that's a big marker of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
So back to the journey. So I get to 7-Eleven now. We did an amazing turnaround of the oil company. We were able to take it from losing money to making money in a relatively short period of time. Sold it. The owners of 7-Eleven, the CEO and the chairman of the Southland Corporation, parent company of 7-Eleven, then grabbed me again and said, would you stay with 7-Eleven now that we're selling Citgo, the PDVSA Petroleum de Venezuela? We'd like you to stay with 7-Eleven and run the retail gasoline business. Well, I was 25 years old. I knew nothing about operations or running a several $billion retail business. But in their minds, I was an oil company guy, right? So of course I must know how to run this business. And we just had a successful turnaround of Citgo Petroleum with the refining and marketing divisions. So they hired me for this pretty amazing job. And because I wasn't prepared, again, I had to learn. I had to dig in and study. And what I've discovered in that process is that retail gasoline wasn't being managed with data. It was being managed because the oil companies were monetizing crude. So they would have Exxon stations, Shell stations, Mobil, and they would just be, they'd be like, just price it as cheap as you can, because the more gasoline we sell, the more crude oil we can pull out of the ground and make money on that. And so 7-Eleven had a whole different business model. They had to make money on their gasoline. So we were able to bring data to the equation and help them maximize the margin that they were making by having that right balance between price and convenience of the product. So we ended up making a boatload of money in gasoline. When I got there on the retail side, they were losing 20 or 30% of the stores. They were losing money on gasoline. And then when I got there, we were able to put data in play, turn around the retail pricing model, have it make money, did things like put card readers at the pump to make it more convenient. And gasoline took off, and it was now all of a sudden one of the most profitable pieces of the business.
Wow.
So that turned into opportunity for me. But then another crisis occurred. 7-Eleven parent company, the Southland Corporation, took themselves private. In other words, they did a leveraged buyout, loaded up with debt. This is going to be a familiar story when we talk about Blockbuster again. They had $4 billion at the time at 16.5% interest. Oh, no, it's impossible. I mean, you can't even imagine. It's like buying a corporation, a Fortune 500 company on your credit card, right? But they did. This happened. They took it private. By 1991, the company was filing for bankruptcy protection. The gasoline division was the one piece of the company that was beating all of its forecasts and contributing to the success, while the rest of the business was failing. So that was my opportunity when we emerged from bankruptcy. I literally almost quit. A lot of people quit. It's like, oh, we're going to go away. We're filed for bankruptcy. But instead, I stayed, worked harder, kept my head up, saw it change as opportunity, not as devastating for my career, and came out of it with a promotion.
Wow. You started by solving a big problem, right? Yep. Solved the big problem. Carly Fiorina said in this podcast, running towards the fire. I'm taking on the project that nobody has figured it out. It's a problem here.
Right.
We're going to find a way to solve it. And when you do, you take on the tough projects. And when you solve them, what happens? Right? Like doors open, opportunity is there, and you run. And then that promotion eventually leads to you being the CEO.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple steps in between.
Sure.
They made me vice president of strategic planning. So in other words, coming out of it, now we're a newly emerged company out of bankruptcy. And the board said, whatever you did over there on the gasoline side, do it for the whole business. So lay out a strategy for the whole of 7-Eleven. I was able to do that. I was able to model the success of some of our licensees like 7-Eleven Japan that ended up being a majority shareholder in the company. Went over there, saw what they had done well. Again, they had used data to change the whole business. So we dramatically transformed the technology in the company, brought data to the table, went from 10 years of same-store sales declines to 10 years of same-store sales increases, literally coming out of that bankruptcy environment. So they made me first head of planning, then chief financial officer, which I had no business being. I wasn't a CPA. I was fortunate to have a really good controller and a really good audit partner with PwC to be able to keep me out of trouble. In the days of Enron as a chief financial officer of a public company, that was quite challenging times. But we were able to rebuild the balance sheet, and then they made me chief operating officer. I was able to execute the plan that I had helped to build, and then by 1999 they announced me as the next CEO, and I was able to then, take back to the investment market the new 7-Eleven, and we had a great stretch from 2000 to 2005. I think we grew the equity value from $4 to $40 a share.
Wow. Well, we fast forward a little. You do such great work. Then you've mentioned his name already during this conversation that Blockbuster is going through some issues, and Carl Icahn, well-known guy, says, I want you to try to fix this mess. I want you to be the guy to clean up Blockbuster. And he taps you on the shoulder to do it. One, can you just talk me through what that process was like, having him say, Jim, you're the guy? I mean, he could probably pick literally anybody in the world. And he said, I want you. What was that like?
Well, he didn't really say, I want you. He actually looked at me and said, who the hell do you think you are?
Oh, okay.
I mean, you got to know Carl to appreciate that. I mean,
I don't know him, so go ahead. Yeah,
he's a fascinating guy. I love him. He's a fascinating guy. I learned a lot from him, but he can be very challenging at times. This was one of those times. I was trying to post 7-Eleven figure out, how do I take that same skill set? I learned the power of technology, both on the gasoline side and the rest of the business, to leverage technology into better decision making, using data for, a transformation of the business. Worked at 7-Eleven like a charm. I wanted to do that again. And so I was looking around. I was looking at Radio Shack. I was looking at Blockbuster, companies that had great brands, but that had kind of lost their way and weren't making that transformation. So I looked at Blockbuster as convenient access to media entertainment. I didn't look at it as a bunch of stores. I didn't look at it as a dying business. I learned the lesson at 7-Eleven that convenience is never going away, but you have to change. You have to adapt to be able to continue to offer a higher level of convenience. And that was a perfect opportunity to do that at Blockbuster. So my objective was, I had talked to private equity. I was trying to partner with private equity to take Blockbuster private. I was on the road show talking to investors, and one guy named Michael Zimmerman loved what I had to say, picked up the phone, called Carl Icahn right there on the spot and said, we're coming over your office. I got a guy here. You need to listen to him. And 20 minutes later, we're at Carl's office in the old GM building in New York, 56 floors, something like that, in his office, in this big old conference room. And he's looking across the table. He hears my plan. He says, again, who the hell do you think you are? I said, well, I got an idea. I think I can do this. And I want to do it. I want to take the company private with you. I'm happy to work with you to take it private so that we can do this outside of the glare of the public markets, because transformations, as I learned at 7-Eleven, are hard. They're really hard as a public company. Public companies have very short time frame expectations. And this was going to be a good 5-year.
Yeah, you got to hit every quarter, right?
Exactly. And we weren't going to do that while we were trying to compete with Netflix and transform to digital. It just wasn't going to happen. Carl talked me out of it. He said, I'm a finance guy. You're the operating guy. Just shut up. Just, we're going to keep this thing public. Come on, join us, and you be CEO, chairman, CEO, and we'll just do this.
So he talked you out of the plan, but he still wanted to hire you.
Oh yeah, no, you wanted me to join the company as an employee, as opposed to joining it as, taking it private.
Gotcha.
Which I at the time, man, I wish I could have had that one over again, because had we refinanced $1 billion in 2007, taken the company private, we would not have batted an eyelash through the financial crisis, because in the financial crisis, we had a third of our debt due in 2009. We would have had 5-year terms from 2007 on. We would have sailed right through the financial crisis without really skipping a beat, because our problem wasn't cash flow. We had plenty of cash flow in Blockbuster. Our problem was the debt, satisfying the debt.
Yeah.
And not being able to refinance it.
Wow. Amazing. There's so much there. This has actually flown by, but I want to actually go to a moment. I think Columbia asked you to come back to teach, and you're teaching there. And as you're walking on campus, you see a student wearing a shirt that said, "Education is freedom." What did you realize at that moment?
Yeah, it was one of those, you've got these moments in life that are kind of an epiphany, and it's like stops you in your tracks. And it was one of those spring days, how New York can get, and the trees are all blooming and the flowers are coming out, and I'm walking across campus in a suit and tie. And Columbia University campus was always a very impressive place, with the buildings and low library and all this stuff. And I was just feeling really good about the fact that, wow, I've kind of made it here. I've been invited back to teach a class, Columbia Business School. And then I see this kid, and he's walking toward me, arm full of books, looked like hell, looked like I looked like when I was there, t-shirt on, looked like he hadn't slept in a couple of days, African-American kid. But he had a t-shirt on, and it just said 3 simple words: education is freedom. And it stopped me in my tracks, because I literally stopped him, shook his hand. I said, dude, you're me. That is me. I'm going back to teach, but I would not be here but for education. And I don't know if I've ever really thought about that up until this point. And as I left him and went back to the school, I realized, I thought I was done. And what that t-shirt reminded me and told me is, not only would I not be here but for education, but I'm not done, because I got to keep learning. This is a lifelong process. So it was really a powerful, powerful message. And I filed those 3 words away and said, I'm going to do something with those 3 words someday, because I got to share this message with other people that are in the same boat that I was in, that think they don't have opportunity, because there is unlimited opportunity through education.
So good. Jim, let's say you're meeting with somebody who's around that kid's age, maybe a few years later, they've graduated from school or graduated, they're done with graduate school, and they want to leave a positive dent in the world, but they're not 100% sure what they want to do. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you'd give to that person?
Well, I'd make it really easy. I'd say, read this book, because in this book, you have all of the things you need to know. And I'm only half joking, because in the book, I put those things I wish somebody had told me when I was that age. We get asked that question all the time. What would you tell yourself at 17, 18 years old, that would made things easier for you? And I've broken it down in the book into really three things. It's the how, the what, and the why of learning. And those three things are things no one ever taught me in school. And I was thankfully, somehow I figured it out. But those are the obstacles to so many kids because they don't know what to learn. They don't know why to learn or how to learn. And so I've simplified it in a sense into those three things. And I have a chapter, 3 each. I call them the C-suite learnings because after running 2 companies, these are the things that stuck for me. And they apply to both someone in school, a young entrepreneur, or a corporate person that, wants to do better.
What is the C-suite of learning?
Well, as I said, it's the what, how, and the why. I'll try to recap them really quickly.
Okay.
The what are 3 really important things that you have to learn: change, confidence, and clarity. And those sound so ridiculously simple. Like, yeah. Change, as we talked about throughout this time together, is dealing with whatever form it takes. Adversity, it could be good change, but it's not change. It's how we respond to change that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Confidence is, as you've said throughout, you've got to be fearless. And fear is the culprit. It's killing our country right now, candidly, because we're so wrapped around turn on the TV, all you hear is fear. They're going to take this from you. They're going to take that from you. Well, no one's going to take what you know. And so you've got to have that confidence that they can take my wealth, they can take my car, can't take my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And then clarity of communications, both outbound and inbound. Because if you can't communicate your plan, nobody's ever going to follow it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so clarity is critically important. That's the what. Those are once you learn those things, then you're freed up to begin how to learn. And the how to learn I've characterized as also 3 things. I'm trying to keep it kind of simple and memorable, but those 3 things are critical thinking, something we learn in grammar school. We study Socrates and Plato, and they all ask why. But we stop asking why. Maybe it's because our parents told us to shut up because we're asking why too much, right? But critical thinking is an important part of learning. Curiosity. I am curious about everything. I want to know everything about how things work. Why this? How does that happen? And that curiosity drives me in it, and it's key to being able to learn. And then the third piece of learning, often overlooked, is creativity. That Einstein calls it intelligence having fun. We don't have fun with learning too often. But the creative side of us, the right brain, turns something as dull as algebra into, oh, wow, this is fun. It's solving problems, Mm-hmm. So creativity. So those are the 3 elements of how. The why is the most important. Why do you go to school? Why should I go to college? Why should I bother learning? Those 3 things are critically important. And that is, first is collaboration. I didn't learn to collaborate with people until I got to graduate school and was forced into case studies that I hated. Then I realized, wait, I'm learning from these people. We're going to be better than I could have done on my own in this case study. And so collaboration. The second, cultural literacy. There's all this debate now about diversity, and the word diversity brings all this stuff. But, the reality is you cut through all the clutter and the politics and the ideology and the narrative. Diversity is about learning from other people. Mm-hmm. Because people that don't look like us or have the same background from us are going to be able to share with us a different point of view and different things. And we're going to learn from them. And it makes us a better person. So cultural literacy. And then the third that is so hard is character, integrity, humility, compassion. Those basic things that maybe we learn them in church, maybe we learn them in our family, but too often we forget that our character, I've talked about this several times, talk about your brand and your identity. Your character is that. Can people trust what you say? Can they count on you to show up, to be there, to be engaged? Right?
Yeah. Wow.
Good stuff, isn't it?
It's awesome, but it's so good, man. I'm really appreciative of you being here. The book is called Education is Freedom. The Future is in Your Hands. Incredibly well written. There it is. Looks good. Love the picture from space. But I really appreciate, and I appreciate how you wrote the book, the combination of the storytelling as well as all the practical applications so that you could implement like now. I think that's huge for a book. So incredibly well done, man. I appreciate you being here. I encourage people to get the book and read it and then implement it. It's so good. And Jim, thank you again for being here. I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
Let's do it. I'm still learning, Ryan. I can learn from you, and let's keep talking.
Love it, man. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.